I wanted y'all sat in this order for a reason. Having kind of chatted briefly with you before this, it seems like it kind of fits well. So I will allow you to kind of give a run-through of what Databricks does, and we'll go from there and kind of move up the chain here. Go ahead.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me here. So Databricks, it's a company that's 5 years old. We're about 500 employees, and we started out of UC Berkeley, so there were 6 of us that were researchers at UC Berkeley. We were actually Hadoop researchers back in those days, and what we did back then is we realized that what Google, Facebook, and Twitter and these companies, the 1% companies, are doing to really unlock the sort of value of artificial intelligence is very, very different from the rest of the market. So we wanted to democratize that. We wanted to bring that out to the rest of the market. And what we really wanted to do is we wanted to unify data processing, data engineering with artificial intelligence and combine them in the cloud. So we developed a system called Spark, Apache Spark. And when that took off, we started Databricks in 2013. And we have a SaaS service. And if you don't know anything about Spark and those things, we basically take massive amounts of data and enable you to do predictions on it.
So we have Databricks with Apache Spark. Go ahead with Mesophere, Toby.
Yeah, so we're also about 5 years old. We actually share the same heritage with Databricks. Our core technology was created at the same lab at UC Berkeley. And what Mesophere does is we make essentially software that allows enterprises to become their own cloud provider. So to manage the entire fleet of infrastructure services from your applications, containerized applications, to databases, to data processing tools, machine learning, on a single platform that works on any infrastructure. So sort of decoupling what you're running from where you're running it. You can run that on edge locations in factories, for example, or one of our customers runs it on a cruise ship. To any public cloud provider, to private cloud, to bare metal infrastructure.
So we have marrying AI and data processing. We have using that in different environments, using whatever application or whatever tools in different environments. Go ahead, Charles.
Charles Phillips, CEO of Infor. We're a business applications company, think kind of ERP. About 17,000 employees, $3.5 billion in revenue, and we build cloud applications essentially by industry. So we essentially made a bet 8 years ago on AWS, so we're their 3rd largest customer now in AWS, about 77 million subscribers. Automating end-to-end everything from financials, manufacturing, supply chain, but also industry-specific applications in certain industries. And now that we can see all the data and how people are using our applications in the cloud, we built a whole machine learning and science application called Coleman AI, which is our platform, to actually give people insight into those applications and how they're using them to improve business processes.
So, and the applications and additional data processing. And Toby, I want to start with you. Given the audience, folks who are kind of in the industry and doing this kind of work, managing different workloads in different environments, that seems to be kind of the thing that is on the mind of folks these days. What are the top line questions that you're getting from customers, from people you're working with in terms of how to do that, how to do both things and marry them, and kind of what's your answer?
Yeah. So what we're seeing a lot is that data is really becoming the most important IP for a lot of organizations. So folks are building data-driven applications, and they need to figure out, well, how do I do all the different, how do I put all the different components for a data-driven application into a production environment? How do I make them secure? How do I make them highly available? And for a data-driven application, I always use connected cars as an example because that's an industry that's going through a massive shift from just assembling cars in the past to now building a software product. They need to figure out, how do I ingest all this telemetry data from cars? How do I process it? How do I store it for the long run in large scale? So many different infrastructure technologies need to come together. And they need to run it on various different types of infrastructure because they sell cars to pretty much every country on Earth, and there is no cloud provider in the world that operates in every single country.
I mean, if you're a German, if you're in Germany, obviously the rules are very different than if you're sitting
exactly.
here in the US.
There's regulations around that data and where it can be stored. So the questions we get is, the most common questions are like, well, which technology should I choose, right? And they need to make a lot of different decisions. There's not a single platform that can do all this. So it's which database do I choose, what I use for machine learning, what do I use as a message queue, and so on. And then the other questions we get is, well, which cloud provider should I choose, or which infrastructure should I choose? And there are answers sort of, we're seeing that increasingly happen in the market, that folks are really using a hybrid cloud model. because there's pros and cons for both public cloud and private cloud, and we're seeing more and more folks combining them. In fact, we did a survey recently that we do every 2 years. This year, 1 in 4 respondents, 1 in 4 companies said they're going with multiple cloud providers. 2 years ago, that was 1 in 8. So that's really, really changing, and folks are adopting multi-cloud.
Charles, as you're thinking about customers and as they're increasingly avoiding one provider lock-in, what are the things that folks are asking about in the context of both using your tools, but also, as was mentioned, there's a lot of partnerships and use of multiple applications that also work together. How do you kind of help somebody game plan to get you in there, use your technology, but also have it kind of work with their entire infrastructure?
Well, you do have to be open to accommodate different types of applications and data that may not be your own. So although we are primarily on AWS, we have a slightly different strategy, and we made that bet, and it's actually paid off pretty well because we knew it well. We get early access to technology. They resell our products, and so we get some benefits for being so focused. But on the other hand, everything we do, we replicate to a data lake. So every transaction in our applications we put there, and you can add third-party data to that as well. So for analytics, you can't be closed. And so that's our answer to saying we can accommodate anything you have. You can have it replicate on-premise, back, however you want to do it, mobile access. And we do our machine learning and reporting on top of that data lake. So as we change our applications or change schema, it doesn't break any reports. All the analytics still work. And so we can separate the applications from the data lake is our answer.
And that data lake, was that something that customers asked for? Did you introduce that in the beginning? That's a really interesting idea, and allows them to both use what you've got, but also do more with what's coming out of it.
They didn't ask for it at the beginning, but we knew they would eventually. It would be a barrier that if we didn't solve for that. And so we have to be open to integrate to any cloud, and also do the same thing for data as well. So that way you get the best of both worlds. So most of them are already struggling with some form of a data warehouse trying to do this themselves. We can do it in real time, and so they can get answers in real time from our applications because we're replicating with what we call trickle feed, event-driven. You add a purchase order in our system, it's in the data lake seconds later.
So when it comes to the data processing front, and we touched on this a little bit earlier with Josh of Domo, when it comes to the answers that they want from data processing solutions, are there different ways of going about it, whether you're sitting in the CEO seat or whether you're sitting in the CIO seat? Do the questions differ when you're talking to potential customers about what they're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, so Databricks, just to give you a background, Databricks we're a cloud-only company, so we don't have any presence on-prem whatsoever, and that was a deliberate decision. We understand there's need for hybrid in the market, but we think that just the cloud way is very, very different than from the on-prem way. And building cloud services where you're upgrading the software on a daily basis, and we are on the hook for security, for reliability, all these things. It's just a completely different business, and each of the cloud providers have built very different clouds now. And if you want to really reap the benefits of these different clouds, you really want to go deep and integrate with all the things that they have. And so what CIOs often now face is, as they want to build their data solutions in the cloud, either they go with kind of on-prem solutions that they're installing into the cloud, but then they're kind of back to on-prem and they're running kind of on-prem in the cloud. So that's one option for them. The other is to go super deep on one of the clouds and integrate with everything they have to get all the benefits of that cloud provider, but now they're locked in, and as locked in as they were previously. And our solution is, we are a layer that works across the clouds. We'll integrate super deeply to get all the benefits of those cloud providers, but then the CIOs can build their software on top of us. So that's something that a lot of them talk to me about. They say, we're worried. We know that we don't want to just install on-prem software in the cloud because then we don't get the benefits. But we're also worried if we go super deep into one of these clouds, we're just as locked into any of these clouds as we were to on-prem software. There's no difference. In fact, there is now, I don't want to name names, but there are multiple big SaaS companies that are completely locked into the cloud that they've picked because they've sort of architected their way so deeply into those clouds that they'll never be able to get out of those. So I think those are the kind of concepts that are top of their mind.
Do you get pushback? I mean, I think of financial services, I think of pharma, I think of industrial companies. Do you get pushback from folks who feel better about having some of their stuff on-prem? How do you kind of deal with that?
So I've always viewed it as in sort of crossing the chasm.
Sure.
There's like the innovators, there's the early adopters, there's the early majority, late majority laggards. So the cloud is sort of going through those waves. So depending on who you're talking to, if you're talking to Capital One, they're sort of early adopter. They use all these technologies. They were the first to go to the cloud. And then you have the laggards at the very far end that are sort of, no, we don't want we would never go there. I feel that in the last year and a half, even the laggards, the most laggard companies that I wouldn't even talk to, I would not even take those meetings, they now tell me cloud is guaranteed. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Can you help us? We need this security compliance. And also, can you help me convince that guy in my company? He's a blocker, and so on. So now I haven't met any CIO in the last year and a half that's saying, no, we're not going to do it.
What do you think was the tipping point for that?
I mean, I just think that it's very obvious when you look at the clouds, how they're doing it compared to...
It obviously wasn't that obvious if folks are lagging, right?
Well, to me, it was obvious all along, but, it's just, the cloud vendors can do better, especially when you're talking to laggards. The cloud vendors are definitely better at security. They're definitely better at this stuff than the laggards are, at least. Maybe some of the earlier adopters could have competed with them, but, those are the last companies that would be good at this stuff, and those are the ones that are saying, hey, we think we can do it better, so it's just a matter of time before they realize. And also, they're under so much cost pressure that they need to reduce costs in IT and do it more efficiently. So it's just a matter of time before the cloud vendors can do it better. The major thing that changed in the last, I would say, 2-3 years is that it used to be Amazon was the only cloud game in town, and the prices were pretty high. Then all of a sudden, you have now 3 cloud providers. Each of them have infinite pockets, right? So Google is using all its ads money. Microsoft is using all its Office and Windows money. And then you have Amazon that's using all this retail money of the planet. And they're funneling this war, which makes the price very competitive. So the prices are dropping quickly. So at that point, it just becomes, you just look at the numbers, and and then not to mention all the agility that you get if you're in the cloud. So I think that price pressure created a competitive market where it becomes obvious for the CIOs that maybe we should just try this. Maybe it's cheaper. Maybe it's better.
Are you seeing the same trajectory of the laggards getting up to speed? Is that how are you seeing that kind of manifest itself in your business?
Yeah, definitely. I think I agree with Ali. I think that the people that are sort of not going to the cloud for like data privacy reasons, that number is declining. But another trend that we're seeing is actually the sources of data are changing, right? Like in the past, most enterprise data was generated within that organization. Now with IoT and connected cars, a lot of that data comes from the edge of the network, right? From consumer devices, from cars. And so it's simply not in a centralized place, right, where the cloud is a great fit. So I think the model will be yes and, right? It's cloud, and you're going to have to figure out how to process and store data at the edge of the network too, wherever that's coming from, in your business. So for example, we work with a lot of companies that have multiple different manufacturing sites around the world. And so what they want to do is they want to use their sensor data that's coming off of the production line and make decisions based on that data locally in the factory. They don't want to be dependent on a cloud location that's thousands of miles away. If you lose the internet connection, that would impact production, right? So I think it's yes and.
So I want to get back to the point that you made, Ali, with Charles about customer spend and industry spend, because that infrastructure layer has gotten less expensive. It is kind of commoditizing to a certain extent. Where are you seeing customers kind of shift their focus in terms of what they want from somebody who is providing technology for them?
Well, I do think the security aspect is something that changed in the last 3 years, especially we automated a lot of the intelligence agencies and federal government, and they have a special GovCloud thing, but essentially people learned that if it's good enough for a 3-letter intelligence agency, they should probably check this out, and so that helped convince the rest of the market. And then there was the volume of data. People know that it's valuable, but the volume is just escalating. And trying to do that on premise got very tough. If you really want to do machine learning, get some insight, and get value out of that data, you're not going to be able to keep up. So we saw some customers who would just say, just do the data lake first, because I can't keep up with that. And then over time, I'll move the application. And so the third thing they're looking for is the correlations across different domains of data. So what we do now, which we couldn't see before, we can tell if you're having a manufacturing problem, a quality problem, is that because it's related to HR issue where you have that shift, or did you have turnover there, or was it a supplier? All these things are related in a CEO's mind, but you couldn't get to those correlations on your own. But now, for the first time, all that data is in one place. that's what they're driving, asking us to do those correlations.
And looking forward, what's the thing that, and I will actually kind of break my norm and go down the line in this, what's the thing that folks are asking for you next? Or what is the thing, like the data lake, that you're saying you're going to need this, you just don't know it yet?
So the next thing is everybody's outsourced some percentage of their operation. Nobody's vertically integrated anymore. So if you're Nike, all your suppliers are over in Asia. So you can't just automate Nike. That's one of our customers. You have to somehow onboard their suppliers so they can see work in process, status, shipment, all that stuff. And so we had to reach out and build a network, which is what we've done, to onboard their suppliers so they can also add that data to the data lake. So you need data from outside your organization, because you can't improve efficiency or productivity if you don't include your network of trading partners.
That's really interesting. And so when you are, I mean, that seems invaluable to have additional information, whether you're a retailer or, you know, in another industry, from kind of different counterparties that you work with. How does that conversation go in perhaps getting your customer to convince them? Is it just, look, we think you'll have more value in this? I mean, that's a lot of work, and getting other people on board.
And usually what they ask is, how do I get, who goes first? Because the network is only valuable if everybody's on the network. So you have to go to the brand owner, the guy who's spending the money, and the suppliers will follow them. So we'll go to Nike, we got Nike. Because we got Nike, 60% of Adidas, the suppliers were on, so we got Adidas, and then Puma. So you go down by vertical, and then once you have enough suppliers on, you get the freight forwarders on, the customs brokers, all these people who are involved in shipping and building products. It's a whole kind of network of people that have to know where this product is at any given time. Once they're all on, everybody sees shipment status in transit, and everybody can share and collaborate. And these orders change all the time, right? So average Nike order changes 9 times because demand's changing. People want different size, styles, and colors. How do you communicate that to 5,000 suppliers? So the network aspect of it is a big part of it, and that more naturally happens in a cloud.
Visibility into your entire network, not just your own company. So for you, what is the thing that folks are asking for, or saying, help us be on top of the next big thing before it's here?
Yeah, I think it is really around building these data-driven applications, right? And I think so in software engineering, right, when we build software, we put applications out in production. There's best practices that have been established a long time ago, right? How we deploy applications into production, how we do upgrades and things like that. But for what I call data products, so products that have data and machine learning at their core. Those same best practices don't always exist, right? So folks are asking, well, how should I think about this, right? And we think about this as a platform, right? A data platform that goes through all the different steps of, collecting, cleaning the data, building models, putting them in production, monitoring them. So it's about applying those same principles that we've used for shipping and operating software in production to the data and machine learning space. And I think alongside with that, to add to what I said earlier, I think folks need to be smarter about how they manage their data, right? It's just, there's a lot of complexity. Data has lots of different formats now. It's no longer in a single structured database. You have structured data, unstructured data, streaming data. Sure. So a lot of complexity in that, and so folks are asking, like, well, how should I think about that? Is that one data lake where I should put everything? Or do I need multiple systems? Where should those be running?
When you are thinking about those best practices for data management and being smarter about how you're doing it, what are kind of some of the common pitfalls that you're seeing with folks? Perhaps some of the folks in this room are running into similar issues.
Yeah. So what I see, there's really a skill gap that we've seen, and I always compare this to what happened in software engineering, where we have this new DevOps role, right, that combines development and operations. So it's really folks that have both of these experiences, where you got rid of this sort of wall between the two fractions. One fraction builds the software, the other one operates it. We're still seeing that done a lot around data science and machine learning, where you have data scientists that are mathematicians, right? They can build the models, they can work with the data, but they don't know how to operate production systems. And especially with deep learning and other things, where you're working with massive amounts of data and compute, operating these systems is really, really complicated, and you really need folks that are experts in that world. And so, similar to what happened in software engineering, we often see distributed systems operators and data scientists, and they're kind of two different camps. But what's starting to happen is that folks are hiring for this new role called data ops. So it's really someone who combines both of those skills, who has a math background and an operations or software engineering, distributed systems background. And that really seems to bridge the gap and solve those challenges.
So perhaps a new tip for folks in the room: if you don't have a data ops person, hire them now before they get more expensive. And if you're
There already are pretty expensive.
Yeah, if you're watching from home and you're in one or the other, perhaps it's time to. I guess you're not picking up a textbook these days.
Right.
You're learning elsewhere. For you, Ali, when you're trying to help customers project forward what they should be and what's top of mind.
Yeah, I hear the same things as Toby said. So basically, they come to us. So here's what we saw. We saw first the cloud was a big, disruptive paradigm shift that they were going through. That's largely happened, at least in the earlier phases. Those have crossed the chasm. The next thing was, how do we get our data strategy, data lakes, being data-driven, big data, how do we solve that? So they started to collect all this data in these data lakes and stored it all there, and they're counting how many petabytes they have. That's great. Now they're coming to us and say, okay, but what do we do with this? How can we actually get machine learning working on top of this data? We want to do what Google and Facebook and Twitter and these companies are doing. See how data-driven they are? We want to get the automation that they have. Help us with that, and our projects are failing. And the problem is the way they're doing it is completely wrong. And in fact, the way almost every vendor on the planet is telling them to do it is totally wrong. So they're struggling big time. And those are the challenges that come to us.
How is it then that, and I asked a similar question to Josh earlier, how is it then that you're seeing that everyone else is doing it wrong? What is kind of the secret sauce that you're seeing that is different than the Googles of the world are saying?
Yeah, so we saw this 10 years ago when we were when we were researchers back at Berkeley. We saw how Google, Facebook, Twitter, these companies were doing it. They're operating differently from the technology that's being sold to you. What we were seeing was that Google had taken the whole internet, compressed it down, built custom file formats and systems, it's called Bigtable, where they could really start doing machine learning on the whole internet so efficiently, so fast, so easy, right? Whereas the rest of the world have data in data warehouses, data lakes, and so on. There's no way you can do what they were doing, right, with the investments they did. You look at Twitter, they took the whole tweet stream, put it into streaming systems where they could really analyze the tweets. Facebook did the same thing with the social network. They had a special graph system they built for it so that they could combine the data and the AI. The problem that the vendors and the CIOs are facing today is that there are data vendors that sell them data solutions, but those data solutions have no AI or machine learning in it whatsoever. You can just go through the list of all the data vendors that you're buying from. Do they have any AI capabilities? The answer is no. None of them have anything that has to do with machine learning, right? And yet they talk about it, but they're just selling you a data warehouse or a data lake or something like that. On the other side, you have the machine learning vendors. There's lots of them, and they say, hey, here are the latest machine learning algorithms, automation, this and that, but it has no data capabilities. If you ask them, how can the data problems I have, the data lakes I have, the data warehouse, what do I do? They don't know, right? So the secret sauce is you have to be able to combine the two. You need systems that combine the data engineering with the data science. If your system is not doing that, you're going to have problems. You're just going to dump lots of data in a data lake, but then when you're trying to build your machine learning application on top of it, those are going to fail because the data is dirty or it's not set up correctly for machine learning. So they should look at solutions that combine the two. And I'm obviously biased. Databricks has such a solution, but...
So with Databricks, why choose open source? Apache Spark is open, obviously. Why go that route?
Well, so really, when it comes to data in big enterprises is really spread out, siloed in different systems, different formats. There's lots of legacy systems. So it's not like you can't, it's not a, hey, put all your data here and there's a clean format and then we're done. It's already locked into lots of legacy systems and it's owned by different departments and so on. So you'd like to hook into all that exists. Okay? And with an open source system like Spark, you can have the benefit of thousands of people around the world contributing, hey, here's a format connector for this particular data format. Here is authentication module for this particular legacy module. Here's a mainframe connector for mainframes and so on. That way you can sort of hook into what the enterprises already have rather than prescribing that you need to have exactly this format in this place. That doesn't help the enterprises in the United States because they have so much baggage that they need to deal with. So that's why open source helps. You get this community of thousands of people around the world that are building these connectors.
And y'all are pretty big into that as well.
Yeah,
I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with Ali. I think the main thing about open source is really it fosters innovation, right? If you run into a particular problem or you need to connect to a particular system, chances are someone in the community has already solved that problem, and you can just use that solution. So I think that is the magic of open source. It's really that community coming together and innovating really fast. What we're also seeing is that a lot of customers that we're talking to, they're now treating open source almost like a feature, like on an RFP, right? Is it open source? Because it really shifts the power balance between the vendor and the customer. And less commonly, but we also see it, is folks with specialized needs. If you have open source software, you can tweak it yourself.
And Charles, when you mentioned fast and the value of open source and agility. So Charles, when you think about customers needing to be agile and make those kind of decisions, what's the perhaps pain point for you, the frustration when you're trying to help them as a cloud vendor and perhaps they've got some legacy systems in the back room?
Yeah, so we tried to take some open source thinking and bring it to business applications for the first time. So we're the only ERP company that runs on open source. We run on Postgres, Aurora on AWS, a number of other things. But we went further because we think this data movement is going to seep into applications. So we built a data access layer underneath our app, so we don't have to run on a relational database. It could be NewSQL, NoSQL, Hadoop, because we have some of our internet customers who have such huge volumes. They cannot run on a single machine in a database. They want it to scale out. And so I think that's the future of applications, is they're going to have to understand a lot of what these data technologies. Apps vendors are so focused on the apps layer, or they had their own proprietary database. They weren't thinking like that. So I do think that shift is coming to the applications market. The way we get to some of that legacy data, it's lots of ways to do it, but it is probably one of the biggest problems is trying to get that data. You can do master data management, trying to map it all together. We prefer to do it at the source, to have them converted to XML, and then have that come across, and that takes the work away from us and puts it back on the application at the source. Otherwise, it's a huge problem trying to get a logical and semantic understanding of all the data. I mean, we do it both ways, but it's messy.
Messy, and hopefully y'all are helping create a more simplified data world. Ali, Toby, and Charles, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate the conversation.